So, yes, my name is Chris Hadsell, and yes, I am a board member here at the Athenaeum. I've been, I don't know, at least 5 years. But I've also been in and out of the Northeast Kingdom for 54 years now. Amazing. My husband was Bill Mayers, and we actually moved here to St. Johnsbury in 1970, and then later moved to Burlington. But we have a camp, and it's cold up there right now, but that's where I'm staying. And so Bill died a year and a half ago now, and just before he died, he finished a memoir that came out, printed by Rootstock. There are actually a couple copies out there, but he left an unfinished pile of essays that he had, more or less, that he had solicited, although a few were added by me and Jane, from people he knew or knew of. He didn't necessarily know all these people, but people who he thought would have something to say and knew how to write, because he wasn't interested in writing something for somebody. So Jane and I stepped in as a kind of a team. But we also had Don Hooper, who did the illustrations as part of our team. Hooper had just done a humor book with Bill, and he also did Out, the Secession book, one of those Frank Bryan, Bill Mayers books. God, 25 years ago, Don Hooper had been the illustrator for that all those years ago. So we had ourselves a sort of I like that idea, a pod of people who put our minds to getting this book done. And Rootstock came through as publisher, Don Hooper, and Jane as editor, and me as kind of, all dog's body. Why not just call it what it was? Pick up all the small pieces. And the result tonight is we have 6 Kingdom authors, except for one who's not from the kingdom, but he's closer to the kingdom than he is to anywhere else. And so we're going to ask them to read their piece, and I'm going to ask people not to save your questions or your comments until the very end. Let's get all the readers done with their readings, and then there will be time to say whatever it is you want to say. So the people we have tonight are Mark Breen, Jane Kitchel, Scudder Parker, Brett Stanciu, Ben Doyle, and Eric Duncan, who is the outlier. He's from away. But these are the readers that we have for tonight. So I'd like to start with Mark, and then we'll follow with Jane. And after that, I'll let the people know, because you'll never remember where you are. But if we start with Mark first, and then Jane Kitchel, and let's, this is the first time any of us have heard any of these stories read out loud. So it's going to be an interesting project to see what happens with them. Thank you. And Jane, would you like to say anything?
First of all, thank you for coming. And I just want to give a special thank you to our writers. I had a back and forth with these folks by email and had not met them in person, so tonight is really special for me to meet all of you. I feel some sort of connection to you, even though I don't really know you, but I just want to thank you again for being part of this project. Bill would be thrilled.
Yes. Okay, Mark, you're up.
Okay. I feel like I should read a disclaimer before I read this, only because this does talk about the weather in the future, but this is not a forecast. Okay? Just want to put that out there. Okay. After another April of heat and snow, Mark Twain must be tossing his head back in great laughter. Who knows? Maybe He's become the weather apprentice he alluded to in his musings over a century ago regarding our weather. Back in 1876, the great American humorist said, "I reverently believe the Maker who made us all makes everything in New England, but the weather." I don't know who makes that, but I think it must be raw apprentices in the weather clerk's factory who experiment and learn how in New England. It's hard to dispute that our chaotic weather comes at the hand of some inexperienced novice with no particular understanding of the ramifications of such lurches in our climate, from the 80s last week to the snowstorm we're finally digging out of. You must admit, nearly everyone has been surprised at the twists and turns that the climate has taken over the past few decades. In the early 2000s, it appeared climate science had the general course of climate change figured out. Our ski seasons would be shorter, maple sugaring would migrate to the north, growing tomatoes would be a piece of cake. Summer would sizzle more often, and we'd save on heating each winter. Then, as often seems the case, Mother Nature sat up and took notice. The melting ice in the Arctic has really made a mess of things. Instead of the Beach Boys crooning about surfing safari or surfing USA, we're more likely to hum to Winter Wonderland and Frosty the Snowman. Who would have thought that Stowe would have a regular Mother's Day finish to the downhill season? The colder water injected into the North Atlantic by the melting Arctic forced the warm Gulf Stream much farther north, or farther south, turning northern Europe into an icebox, and that in turn has changed our weather patterns, resulting in earlier snows in October instead of November, and essentially white Easters as the norm. Of course, in Vermont, that means we've adjusted. The Easter Bunny now is the Easter snowshoe hare. Hey, if the kids get their chocolate, they're happy. However, this transition has not been simple nor straightforward. The heat through the tropics won't behave itself, occasionally surging north to send April temperatures into the 80s, with the melting snow cascading through mountain streams into the swollen rivers. Fortunately, recent completed levees through Montpelier, Waterbury, and Burlington have greatly eased flood impacts there, but numerous smaller communities are struggling to adjust. Summer, though shorter, has been less affected. With the new, hardier varieties of tomatoes, squash, and melons, market and backyard gardeners are enjoying plentiful harvests, except for the occasional midsummer frost. At least forecasting has improved, with a few days of warning before any cold spells have a chance to do much damage. With the more reliable snow, I am excited about the 2054 Winter Olympics, hosted by Burlington, especially with Vermont's emergence as the curling capital of the United States. It's going to be a fantastic event.
Good evening, everyone. Chris mentioned pods, and I brought some. My essay is probably quite different than anyone else's. And of course, I used small print because I don't know how to enlarge it once I'd written it. So my essay is The Gift. I grew up on a farm in Danville that had been in the McDonald family since the 1830s. My mother, who was a McDonald, instilled in me and my many siblings a strong sense of family history and connection to the land. My grandfather McDonald maintained a large garden, and we were told that he took great pride to make his rows straight and his plantings were in order. We were told that one time when the minister inquired of him why he was not in church very often, his reply was simple: "While you're praying, I'm hoeing." With this connection to the land, it is not surprising that I've been an avid gardener for many years. So it was with great interest over 50 years ago, in the early 1970s, I accepted a gift of heirloom bean seeds from a gentleman in Danville by the name of Otis Brickett. The provenance or the name of the bean is unknown. The only information Otis provided was that the bean supposedly came from a peddler who lived in North Troy. In the absence of a name, the bean has become known as the Otis bean. Between the two of us, Otis and I have cultivated and saved the seeds of this bean for nearly a century. It is a pole bean that germinates well whether the weather is wet or dry and the leaves and plants are vigorous. When I first started growing the bean, it produced flowers and pods mostly along the lower bottom of the plants. Over the years, as the climate has changed and the growing season has lengthened, the beans have adapted, and the plants now flower and yield nearly to the top of their 6-foot vines. It is a beautiful sight to see a wall of white blossoms that produce heavy, thick, green pods that now contain up to 4 beans per pod. When the seed pods turn brown, they are ready for harvesting, shelling, and drying. The Otis bean is shaped somewhat like a lima and makes wonderful baked beans. I'm often asked by people after eating my baked Otis beans where they can buy the seed. Of course they can't be bought, in my opinion, are truly priceless. There is no question that the Otis bean is labor-intensive, requiring tall wire to support them, and then their harvesting and preservation is time-consuming. When I accepted this gift from Otis many years ago, little did I realize what an obligation I had assumed. I am now the guardian of this legacy. In turn, my son and I have given seeds to people who will carry on the tradition and commit to their preservation. The more people who grow and treasure this heirloom bean, the better the chances that it will endure. In the past 50-plus years, I have observed how this bean has become more prolific. There are now more beans in the pods, and the yields have increased. In 2023, despite all the rain, my plants produced over 20 pounds of dried beans. Each fall, I carefully sort the beans, keeping the beans from the pods that produce 4 seeds for planting the following year. I remain optimistic that even with our rapidly changing climate, the Otis bean will continue to adapt and flourish. If the 100 past years are any indication, I believe that in 25 years from now, the Otis bean will be even more vigorous and prolific than it is today. And the family and friends will continue to enjoy a bean like none other and will treasure as much as I have. And I did bring the latest Otis beans, and I'm now up to 5 beans per pod. So I brought them for show and tell. So Otis Brickett, for many people who lived here, his brother had Brickett Steiner, which was a St. Johnsbury institution for many years. So that's the connection with Otis Brickett and Brickett Steiner. Thank you.
Let's see, next we have Scudder Parker, and followed by Eric Duncan. And of course, I failed to mention, but the whole point of these stories is to look ahead 25 years from now, what we think Vermont would look like or feel like. Would we want to live here? Do we think the kids are going to learn, are they going to be able to go skiing in the mountains? What's life going to be like? But we're not talking about the ups and downs of the federal government supporting this or that or eliminating this or that program. We're basically talking about how we think Vermont will endure. And so that collectively, that's what these stories are asked to try to think about. Not to solve the problems necessarily, but at least to talk about them. So Scudder, then Eric.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you all for working on this amazing project. It's really fun to do it. And I was the minister out in East St. Johnsbury and Lower Waterford, and Bill and Chris were both close friends with Arnold Waters, who had retired to White Village, and it was just wonderful to get to know them. It was a friendship with all of them together that felt like the anchor for me of this relationship to Bill and to the Northeast Kingdom. So this is a little more serious, and this is a poem from a book that I've just published in April called The Poem of the World. Though I've always loved the song Moonlight in Vermont, mostly because Ella Fitzgerald was singing it, I've always gagged at the phrase, the falling leaves of sycamore. Come on now, how many sycamore trees have you seen in Vermont? Does anybody? Where?
Wyndham County.
Okay. But last week, getting out of the car at the Hunger Mountain Co-op in Montpelier, I noticed with astonishment that new trees had been planted in the beds along the parking lot. You guessed it, sycamores. I'm not sure it makes me feel any better about Moonlight in Vermont, but it is a pretty good lesson in how things change. So in 25 years, what other changes will be in place or seem like the necessary thing to do in Vermont? And this is my hope. How about a change in what we think of quite sloppily as human nature? Might as well be pretentious in what we're doing here. If the Anthropocene both imposes and demands enormous changes, it's not just in our technologies, but most fundamentally in our understanding of ourselves and our ability to live with each other and this earth in ways that celebrate and enrich rather than destroy. I think we have to give up on the inevitabilities that we inherit and espouse so glibly. Sometimes they are in the guise of religious doctrines, sometimes huge social myths. Often they're just sloppy excuses for not thinking about the problems in front of us. I don't want to hear the phrase, "That's just human nature," anymore. And in 25 years, I hope we won't. Think about the righteousness, the fury, the vitriol that surfaced as we moved toward marriage equality in Vermont. Of course, it's not all gone. Some still work very hard to perpetuate it. That's how it survives, doesn't it? But most of us live in a much safer, saner, more joyful world with our sisters, brothers, children, parents, and friends than we used to. Real progress, I think. I take two things from this. The first is that the power of ideas that structure so much of our lives, gayness is immoral, deviant, and evil. Whether it was owned and believed by everybody equally, it was the dominant concept 25 years ago. Guess what? It's not true. But the judgment, oppression, physical and emotional cruelty, shame, the self-hate it caused in people, denial, the pretense, the fear, the hypocrisy, all derive from a well-maintained and institutionalized lie about human nature. Is this what we mean by human nature? I don't think so. The lie warps and shapes our lives, but it's a human invention, not our nature. The second thing I take from the experience with marriage equality is that humans have in us a mitochondria of grace. Okay, that's a new term. How many people know what mitochondria is? Okay, I looked up. Mitochondria are organelles inside our cells that have the ability to translate and chemically form into a new, more usable state the glucose that is generated by photosynthesis that comes into our bodies. So we've got something inside us that takes the chemical that comes to us and converts it into a more useful form. Amazing. At some point, our bodies learned to take into our cells this engine that creates the energy that allows us to be human beings. The mitochondria of grace, I think, is the human ability to turn suffering and loss, disaster and tragedy into sources of kindness, generosity, forgiveness, and healing. Think of the family that was riddled by generations of judgment and separation that starts healing when the hearts in the family open, the son or daughter is welcome home, and their beloved partner helps cook the shared holiday meal. Both the change of heart and the change of the idea are needed for lasting healing. So this poem, which I'm finally getting to, feels sometimes too wonky and aspirational, but I think it's also essential. It's called It's Time. It's time to live insistent as children who are still fearless in their hope, mighty as tides surging in the Bay of Fundy, and when our bloom of confidence ebbs from time to time, still bring passion to our daily work, the close weave of intimacy with each other and our only earth. Attentive even when dismayed, charitable with ourselves, brave with our beloved, intelligent with those who count themselves our enemies. It's time to cultivate our honesty, a fierce, tender frankness of the spirit. Time to let love seize its real ambition. Let compassion flower to companionship, wake our imagination, unleash the genius of creation, astonished at the conspiracy of the universe that makes this life possible. It's time for riotous irreverence, hilarity at the proliferation of absurdity, the litter of distractions. Time to laugh at the pompous, pretentious, the vicious mighty, admit the ravage of oppression, its smoke and mirrors of inevitability, dismiss its glib accusations, boastful confusion, sad excuses, and our hearts joined with all those it injures. We won't let self-appointed power scorn, judge, humiliate, as though it was entitled to control, murder, or manipulate by threat, bargain forgiveness, patronizing charity. It's time for startled recognition of ourselves, awe, stillness, ferocious patience, there beneath our doubt. As we join those who honor understanding, practice clarity, and its insistence. When the no is clear and the yes is wakened, our community is there. No exiles, old lies shriveled like balloons. We build homes to protect, tend soil to garden that will nurture honor, will, and wildness as companion. Restore communities with elegance once unimagined. It's time to stop living in dread of suffering, those perils to our fragile, lovely bodies, the crack of brittle confidence. Instead of tremor and complaint, confess how much we need each other. The stitch of generosity, the heel of kindness, the guide of wisdom, even slowly welcomed. It's time to yield our failed protections, our glib dismissals, our defensive judgments, our learned blindnesses, strange craving for division, the lies whose taste we learn to love, wastelands of grumpy entitlement that stumble us into each other, shrinking our days. Let life astonish in its vast detail, endless invention, calm independence, stun us to humility, and strip us to gratitude for this wellspring earth that we share. Feel it if we hold each other tenderly, not banishing or numbing grief, welcoming our own, each other's tears, courageous, open-hearted, together making music from our pain. This brokenness will be parent of our joy. Let the forests, the waters, the vast open places, and the billions upon billions of our company, past, present, and future, and their great communion, gather us, our bodies and our good green home, joined in a vast shared breathing. 25 years. Why not?
The outlier gets to go after that. It's wonderful. Eric Duncan from Corinth, Vermont. So about 50 minutes down the road, give or take. Thank my wife, Athena, for being here tonight. I had an opportunity to take her out of the deer woods early, which she let me know was generally sinful. So, but we're here. I knew Bill through Vermont Beekeeping Association. I'd worked a couple of commercial seasons with Mike Palmer from French Hill Apiaries, and had a mutual friend, Daniel Pipes, who I had done uniform service with in the military, which was my initial background. I did about 26 years of that, and generally introduced myself as somebody who's living a Johnny Cash song of, I've been everywhere, man, across. So that's as far as I go into it. But in thinking about this book and the writings that were going to come into it, and I'm happy to have a copy now to be able to read through that, we were wondering, my wife and I, what it would take to get our children back to Vermont, which we have two that have gone on endeavors away, both to North Carolina. One and his spouse have just now started their journey back, and our granddaughter and our middle son are currently still away. So some of the things that I've already heard are things that we'll express in our continued pull to try to get them back here. But with that, a short piece. The future is in our past. Pondering what Vermont will look like in 25 years has to start with looking at what this state is and has been. I've been drawn as a central Vermont kid who grew up on the side hills along the I-89 corridor to wonder often about Vermont as a frontier. Genealogy is a great tool for looking at how people have moved from one place to another in search of the next best thing. In these green places around us, I have found stories of families that traveled from Scotland and Ireland and the early colonies to our south, as well as from Quebec, looking for something new. I am a testament, in part, to the fact that they found it here. They have left signs of it in the stone walls, across our aging woodlands, and in cellar holes up Class 4 roads, dotted with perennial flowers and old apple trees. Life's grand adventure has taken me to far-off places with exotic sights, sounds, and smells. As great as it is in seeing the wonders of the world, I love coming home. This is a real and distinct physical and emotional change that happens to me when I cross the border back into Vermont. That sense is like a cool wash of air through the body, a much-needed exhale after having held your breath just a touch too long. I often stop and think about the work it took to clear out a place and what that investment in labor does to the mindset and a sense of ownership. Those working hands are well matched to working minds, as my friends in Craftsbury Common at Sterling College would say. Whether it was the export of many of our best and brightest youth over the last 100+ years, or the continual stream of inbound settlers, this unique republic of ours has only ever known change. I believe that in 2050, Vermont will continue to be a frontier for many. The process might look a little different, and the tools in the hands holding them may as well. But time has a way of circling back on itself. I learned to keep bees from a back-to-the-earther, and to dig under camps on Caspian Lake and pour concrete foundations from an amazing French fiddler. I can still see them both in the landscape, and I carry them with me today. I grew up with old-timers who loved to say that it took 7 generations to truly be a Vermonter. What I've witnessed prompts me to shake my head and disagree. I've run into people who have that Vermont pedigree, so to speak, who have no appreciation for Vermont and its ideals. And I have met many newcomers who have embraced all that it means to be in the Green Mountain State. Vermont, in my opinion, is built upon its resilience, which is found in its diversity. If you live in a shire town in the Central Hills, the Islands, the great Northeast Kingdom, or the Champlain Valley farmlands, you experience Vermont differently. Truly, the gods of the valleys are not the gods of the hills. My Vermont will still be, in 2050, a blue ribbon winning patchwork quilt at the Tunbridge World's Fair. One square, a cold water native brook trout, caught on a light line in the stream that runs along the Roxbury Gap. Next to it, an apple orchard from Shoreham on a west-facing slope looking down to the big lake. At the September fair, where I've taken a respite from manning the beekeeping booth with my wife, Vermonters walk past quilts, flowers, produce, crafts, and livestock, looking for the names of neighbors, friends, and their towns next to colorful ribbons. They are talking about doing work on their sap lines for the next season up in Lincoln Town, or what the woodlot near their home in Chelsea will provide for next year's firewood. Will the conversations be the same in 2050? It's hard to say. But if you embrace that patchwork quilt, the Vermont of 2050 will still be the one you love. It will be a late winter pike chowder off Keeler's Bay and a run up Camel's Hump with your yellow pup after the trails dry. In 2050, as some have alluded to, we may be growing some flowers that like a little bit warmer or longer season, and the oaks might be a little farther north. Our diversity and abundance, both in people and products, will increase. That means seeing more neighbors in places we used to hay. If we're lucky, those folks will want to protect the best of Vermont and help link us back to some of our traditions. I have found that new eyes have a way of rekindling excitement in folks who have been here for a while. There will be new kids up the road who live in homes built far more efficiently than my 1860s farmhouse. And I hope to hear their wonder-filled stories as they explore the Meadowbrook, or listen in the early May morning to turkeys thundering off the roost. I'll point to their folks the shortcut that we take to the transfer station all summer. I'm looking forward to seeing people in Vermont who come from places I've visited around the world. And I hope to share a greeting as I recognize a language that brings me back to mornings far away while we sit in our local diner ordering breakfast. I fully expect that in 2050, Vermont will have a much larger population. And that with that will come more changes to the landscape. More farms will be sold into building lots, but our rural economy will grow in ways that we have yet to imagine. Agriculture and enterprises are becoming more connected to markets and resources than ever before. And I expect that in 2050, we will see more small businesses and farming operations working on the land than we have today. The only question for those of us that will still be here, regardless of where we come from, is this: will we allow the hills to influence and inspire us to be good neighbors, or will we try to change the land around us to benefit only ourselves? Thank you.
Okay, our last two readers are Brett Stanciu from Greensboro and Ben Doyle, who snuck in at the very end. So first, Brett.
I'm just going to move the microphone down a little. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I work in the town of Greensboro, but I actually live in Hardwick. So I kind of go back and forth between the two. And thank you again. This is such an imaginative and interesting project. I've only read my piece, so it's really interesting to hear all these others. And I'm both a fiction writer and a nonfiction writer. And for this collection, I wrote a short story. The title of the short story is Tiny Towns. And it's actually, I snagged the idea from a game that my younger daughter had made up with her best friend. So Tiny Towns. What nobody expected after the internet broke was how time stretched out, lengthened like handmade linguine, rolled and folded, carefully snipped into threads and hung to dry in sunlight over wooden racks, served with chanterelles sautéed in hand-churned butter, sprinkled with sprigs of wild cress. Much more than the internet vanished, of course, but the broken years started there. Before that, in the infamous year 2020, the COVID pandemic stressed the weak places in the good old US of A, the fault lines that lay 500 years deep, or so my mother told us. The vid blew in and ruined my high school years, relegating me to a banana custard yellow bedroom with a laptop where I dreamed of skipping Vermont history class to jostle with my girlfriends in the front seat of Derek's pickup or serve creamies at the Cat Shack. My mother wiped off a card table she found in the barn and told me to bring up a kitchen chair. I shoved the table against the window. That was my desk. I leaned against the window screen, FaceTiming Derek, whose lips tweaked up wryly. He was so dang cute. And my kid sister Alphonse lay on the grass behind our house, her bare soles towards our house, stretched out on our side of the rail fence that separated us from the Hamelmeisters. Janie Hamelmeister, with her ridiculously chunky glasses, lay on her lawn. All that lousy summer, when I should have been knotting my hair into a ponytail and wearing that Kelly green polo with the embroidered vanilla ice cream cone, those two little girls each built a tiny town, each on their side of the fence. In the vid, no one went anywhere or did anything fun, so Alphonse and Janie built their towns from empty Campbell's Chicken and Stars soup cans, scraps of clothesline, a Coke bottle for a water tower. Slowly, without our mother or Janie's parents really seeing, the girls mingled the tiny towns beneath the split rail fence, social distancing be damned. I was too young to vote in the last American election in 2024. I had my driver's license and was cashiering at an Osco drug, earning my first and last W-2 paychecks. Fast as the vid spread, the terrors began, and at Christmas, my mother lit the candle shaped like a lotus flower. We burned all our candles that winter and then went to bed when the sun fell down. In the spring, my mother died of a fever. She was 43. For my 43rd birthday, year 2050, Alphonse warmed me a maple cozy. We carried our cups to the cedar shake treehouse roof. The nesting robins whistled. Our band had built tree houses on the west side of a ridge. From here, we looked down into the river valley. The hayfields had grown into thorny brambles. On my birthday afternoon, Alphonse snagged her thumbnail on a rock she pried up from the garden. She held her maple cozy between her knees and whittled her jagged nails smooth with a knife. Remember work gloves? Remember freezer bags, I said? How easy it was to save the garden's tomatoes and basil for winter. Remember freezers? I didn't freeze stuff. I was a kid. In the pond, the peepers screeched their mad joy. Our such as it was town harbored in the treetops, the height of protection from wandering marauders. Scattered around were heaps of gathered things that might be useful, snarls of electric lines and piles of scrap metal. We tended 8 garden plots to wager a harvest, from the clearing beneath the tree houses to the brassica plot hidden behind the old quarry. Alphonse worked at her nail with that knife. Wonder what happened to Janie. 2.5 decades into the broken years, the old people had all passed. Those who remained had retreated into caves or refashioned buildings into bunkers. We had endured what I could not have dreamed possible when I lived in that banana custard yellow bedroom in our old house. Hunger that pared us to the bone, pillagers armed with AK-47s or janky spears, diseases that destroyed lungs and skin, wrung hearts. Derek and I lived a joke between us. remember the Shire of Vermont? The littles couldn't remember. Only our telling kept that world alive, and then we quit. The telling was too mean. What we never expected is that the world would become more real in ways both savage and delicious. Storms shook our shelters, winds whipped wildfires, wrenches and axes and screwdrivers, treadle sewing machines, wood-fired cook stoves, granite millstones were prized. Blood and brains were spewed over slate shingles. We treasured Derek's anvil and bellows, hay scythes, cooking pots. Alphonse folded the knife and slid it back in her pocket. We sipped the sweet milk as twilight scattered down through the tender leaves just beginning to unfurl. Derek walked out of the barn, milk bucket in one hand. And Randy, our child, ran out of the woods and scooped up her tabby named Gravy. Derek paused, that bucket against his knee. Our child, our little girl, cradled her cat and dipped her head to kiss the creature's nose. She wore a buttery sweater I had knit her from wool Alphonse had spun and dyed with goldenrod blossoms. Alphonse said, "Remember the tiny towns?" I'd forgotten that. It was good prep. We're still doing Tiny Town. Derek held Randy's shoulder and pointed. I jumped up. What now? From the rooftop, the valley spread variated green, the river a gracious sweep. Across the valley, the mountains lined up in silhouettes, cobalt, turquoise, the palest blue. The gibbous moon sailed up steadily, glossy as the milk in Derek's pail, sustenance for our child.
Thanks for doing this, Chris. My name's Ben Doyle. I live in Montpelier, but I grew up in Sutton. And I didn't know Bill that well, but I was happy to hear from him when he called me and asked to do this. I was flattered, but then I got nervous. And I started thinking about it, who else is doing this? And I thought to myself, it's like that old joke, like I would never want to be in a club that would have me as a member. And so I said, well, who else is doing this? And he says, nope, doesn't work that way. I'm not sharing the list. You either do it or you don't, but I'm not telling you, and you just write it. And so I was like, oh, okay. And took a leap of faith and wrote this. And, honestly, picking up the book and looking at the names in here and hearing the people who read tonight, many of whom I've respected for a very long time, I'm really humbled to be in that company. So here's my piece. Vermonters are better at remembering the future than they are at predicting it. We tend to think about the days to come through the images and vernacular of the past. This impulse results in a mixed bag. For one thing, it makes us suspicious of what's new. We're on guard against anything flashy, gaudy, disposable, plastic, or from away. What they used to call wooden nickels. On a good day in Vermont, this qualifies as benevolent vigilance against bullshit. On a bad one, self-righteous provincialism. Either way, Vermont's affection for the past spins a through line that grounds all of us to a sense of place across time. Who hasn't encountered a wall or cellar hole in the woods and thought of the people whose hands laid the stones? Who hasn't wondered what their lives entailed, what their quiet joys and sorrows were, their fears and hopes? Not to be overly dramatic, something very un-Vermonty, but in 2025, two roads really are diverging in a yellow wood. Can Vermont survive the demand of the modern world to homogenize and commodify? What about the alternative posed by the local curmudgeon, afraid of change? A pickled place that resists innovation, new voices, new people. Vermonters must reblaze a trail and think of ourselves not as defenders of a way of life under attack, but as a bridge between what has connected people to this place for generations and the future. A bridge that will require remembrance and imagination. At the Preservation Trust of Vermont, where I work, we build community through the preservation of historic buildings, villages, and downtowns. That's a long way of saying we help people save the buildings they love. What I find continually fascinating and inspiring are the people I meet who are interested in preserving a historic building, be it a general store, town hall, schoolhouse, or barn, not just because these things have been around for a while, but because of the possibilities they present for the future. The magic that happens from the creative tension between the old and the new. In Hardwick, this means that the building that once housed a printing press of a local newspaper can, with the help of a new generation, evolve into the civic standard, an art project, a church of theater, a free supper club, and a public living room for cozy conversations. Or in Bellows Falls, the Miss Bellows Falls Diner can once again serve hash and eggs, but with a new business model based on community ownership that circulates wealth locally and is sustainable. Or that the village church in Peacham, a focal point of community life for more than 2 centuries, now houses a child care center. In Calais, it's a community that doesn't just gripe about the dollar store invasion, it strikes first and reopens an 1850s general store that now has Wi-Fi. What was can be again and be different enough to accommodate change. By necessity, this work favors optimism, the earnest belief that a cultural shift is afoot, that authenticity, humility, integrity, and care are on the ascendance, the conviction that shallow commercialism is going to go the way of disco, that the revolution of values called for by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. a generation ago could start in an as unlikely a place as Vermont. It's for that reason that the optimists will find their way here, just as they did at the beginning of the 19th century or at the end of the 20th. Yesterday's back to the landers might be today's boomers, but they also set an example for a generation looking for old ways of community connection made new. Oh, pioneers. What will Vermont be like in 2050? Familiar, but better. Thanks.
I'm not quite sure how we're going to have questions for the different authors without them coming up. So maybe, does anybody have anything they'd like to say or anything they'd like to ask? And then whoever's the relevant person can come up and answer it. But I hope you get this general impression that Vermonters, no matter how gloomy things might become, will figure it out. And that, I think, is the message that we hope stays with people when they read this little book. So does anybody, also I'm going to say that the authors will sit out at the empty bench down there outside. Oh, and there are refreshments, that's also important. But the authors are all going to be there and are happy to sign books for you, and you can get one signed by 6 people or 1 person, depending on whatever you want. But we're going to do that out in the main room. So is there anybody who'd like to say anything? Yeah.
Would you say a little bit about the tour, though?
The tour, you mean the other places we're going to be?
Yes, please.
Oh, sure. Well, one of the other, tomorrow, I mean, weather's supposed to be horrible, but never mind. I'm going to Stowe, Jane's going to Stowe. We will be in Stowe at the Alchemist. And the reason we're going to be there is that Jen Kimmich, who is the co-owner of the Alchemist, is one of our contributors. And she said, well, I'd like to have a reading at the Alchemist. It's not something they usually do. They have parties there, but they don't usually have readings, but this is sort of an adventure for her. And then on Tuesday, we're going to be at the Charlotte Library, partly because we have a little pod of writers who are from Heinsberg, Huntington, Richmond area, little bit on the southern edge of the Burlington crew. And plus it's a wonderful library. It's a very different library from this. It's a brand new building, but it's also where I go to the Mystery Book Club, so I'm involved with them. And then that's on Tuesday. Then Thursday we're going to be at the Kellogg Library in Montpelier. Again, there's a group of writers who live in Worcester or maybe Barre or Montpelier in the general area, so that becomes their group. And then finally, Phoenix Books on Church Street in Burlington. And most of those readers are people who live in central Burlington. But then Foam Brewery has just asked to have a reading. So I said, sure, why not? And I'm going to, see who would like to go and do that. It'll be like a second reading for people. And I suspect other people will begin to call. And we don't have anything in Brattleboro or the Bennington area because, quite frankly, the writers were all from central to northern Vermont. That's just the people that Bill knew best or had heard about or worked with. And we decided we wouldn't self-consciously stretch to find somebody from Brattleboro or somebody from Bennington. Oh, well, yeah, Bobby Stannard, but he's a one-off. I mean, if you've never heard Bobby Stannard, Robert, I suppose, I call him Bobby Stannard. He is one of the funniest people that has ever hit Vermont. And he was in the legislature at the same time as Bill and Don Hooper. They were all there together, and I suppose you were probably Senator James. No? You were there?
Oh, yeah.
Well.
I'm much younger.
Anyway, he was a legislator among his many talents, he was a legislator. And he may bring his guitar. I think he sings. He does vaudeville shows at the Virgins Opera House. He's an amazing tour de force. But he's our only southern Vermonter. And so therefore, this is really a northern focus. Just happens that way. There are other, I didn't bring them tonight because I thought we'd focus on this book, but Bill did write a book about the first Trump years. It's called The Full Vermonty. In fact, I think, Jane, did you write for that? No, but it was all politicians. So it was either people who were, they were former politicians or they were people who lived the political life. And it now, of course, that was the first Trump era. And it feels, in some ways, it feels more dated than Real Vermonters Don't Milk Goats, which was written 35 years ago. No, 40 years ago. It was written just after our older son was born. But that book lives on. I mean, you can't find it, but it's actually going to get republished next year as a reprint because my friends at Phoenix Books say that it's the most requested book from tourists who walk in the door. They want Real Vermonters Don't Milk Goats. And it's been long out of print. So we're going to actually reprint it. And I was looking at it the other day because I have one copy. It's hilarious, and it's still got more truth to it than non-truth. I mean, Frank Bryan and Bill just had a magic that happened at the diner, at the Oasis Diner. That's where they wrote it. And so that's going to come back out next year. But it will be just a reprint. We're not going to do like a second edition, with new stuff in it. So, any rate, this is, it's been fun. It's been great to meet some of the authors that I'd never met before, and only Jane and I have corresponded with them by email, and there'll be more tomorrow. And you're certainly all welcome to come to any of the other readings, but they are, especially tomorrow, could be a little tricky for getting there. So anybody else? We're going to be hanging around in the other room. As I say, there should be, I think, cider and cookies as well. And thank you all for coming. And I hope you'll buy books for all your friends for Christmas. Okay. if you haven't seen 7 Days this week, there's a full, whoops, this side, a full review